Linear equations. Slope-intercept form of the linear equation is y equals mx plus b. Notice that m is the slope of the line, and b is the y-intercept of the line. So the slope formula, given two coordinates, for instance 2, 3 and 4, 6, well, we can always use the slope m equals y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. Note that after finding the slope, you can use the general formula y equals mx plus b and solve for b using one of the given coordinates. Well, let's try this out. So, slope-intercept form, y equals mx plus b. Keep in mind the slope. Well, the slope is the m value in this equation. Y-intercept, on the other hand, well, do note, y-intercept is not just the v value. It's actually 0, b with coordinates and a comma in the middle. Memorize the 0. Keep in mind, 0 is the x value for the y-intercept. This will never change it. So this is the one thing I recommend you memorize. That for the y-intercept, the x value is always 0. Once again, the y-intercept, the v value in the equation, or the v in the coordinate. But the full y-intercept is 0, v. Okay, let's start with the slope formula. M equals y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. Do not mind the subscripts, the 2 and the 1 on the x's and the y's. All that means is you have two coordinates. But in reality, as long as you use the y on top of the x for the same coordinate, it does not make a difference. So let's omit for now the 1 and the 2. That way it's not confusing. Because I know sometimes you may have them as part of the coordinate, but they're not really part of the coordinate. And that's the confusing part. So let's just call them a y on top of an x for the same coordinate. And basically here's our formula. M equals, with the negative on top, negative on the bottom, fraction sign, meaning a line in the middle. You're going to fill in the blanks essentially. Okay, so in that case, let's fill in the blanks. Let's start with the first coordinate. Well, entirely up to you which one you call the first coordinate, but let's start with the x of 2, and y 3. Let's also use the x value of 4 and y value of 6. Notice I've color-coded them to note where you're locating them or placing them. In reality, I could flip them around. So I could have the greens where the blue is at for the slope formula, and the blues where the greens are at. But the coordinate y value must be on top of that same coordinate's x value. That's the only order that's required. So let's build our formula again. So there's our slope formula again. And let's fill in the blanks. So let's say I chose to put the 6 first. That's the y value. So that means the 4 has to go underneath. So y on top of the x always. The 6 is the y value, the 4 is the x value. Here I could have chosen to put the 3 on top of the 2. And that would also work. And now let's keep this order. So in that case, that means I have to put the 3, which is the y value for the other coordinate, on top of the 2. Okay, now let's simplify this if possible. 6 minus 3 gives us 3. 4 minus 2 gives us 2. Do remember, simplify if possible. Well, let's see. 3 is a prime number and 2 is a prime number. So I can't simplify 3 over 2 anymore. So our slope is 3/2. So let's reference this as an intermediate answer. It's our slope. Notice that's why I have a dashed line. Just an intermediate answer. Now let's use this equation once again. I'm just recopying them. Recombination. When you're working on your homework, put your formula at the top of your page. So at the top of your page, you should have y equals mx plus b as your primary equation. And the secondary equation, m equals y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. Or in other words, 2 y's on top, 2 x's on the bottom. But for this case, let's continue. And let's plug in the slope since we found the slope for this particular equation. The slope is going to be 3/2 as we previously found. So substituting it. Now notice that our equation becomes y equals 3/2 times x plus b. And let's pick one of the coordinates. Let's say you chose 4, 6. If you chose 2, 3, it should also work. Do keep this in mind. It will give you the exact same answer. But it may take more or less steps in some cases. So using the coordinate 4, 6. Let's replace the x and the y values with x equals, since that's the x value, 4, and the y equals 6, since that's the y value, from the coordinates. Okay, there we go. Notice the y value we replaced with the 6, and the x value we replaced with the 4. Notice I put parentheses. That way I can notice that I replaced it with the 4 where the x was. Now let's try to simplify this. So keep in mind, if you have whole numbers such as a 4, you're welcome to put a 1 underneath. 4 over 1. That way we can multiply. And that becomes fairly straightforward multiplication. Multiplication, always straight, right? 4 times 3 or 3 times 4 gives us 12. 2 times 1, 2. Keep in mind, a fraction always implies division. So try to divide and see if you get an exact value. In this case, 12 divided by 2 gives us 6. So now we have 6 equals 6 plus b. So now we must solve for b. So let's get rid of the 6 by doing the opposite. Notice that the 6, the one that's next to the b, is positive. Not because of the positive that's after it, because that belongs to the b, but rather the blank that's before the 6. We don't show positive values at the beginning, or we don't show a positive sign, I should say. So let's do the opposite. Get rid of it by subtraction. So minus 6 on both sides. 6 minus 6 gives us 0, and on the other side, 6 minus 6, we say it cancels out. Or we can say both of them cancel out, in this case, given a 0 technically. So b equals 0. And this is another intermediate solution. b equals 0. So let's put dash around that. Let's realize that our slope from what we got previously is 3/2. So we got the slope and the y-intercept, or at least the v-value of the y-intercept, which is 0 in this case. Or we can call it 0, 0 if we want to write the full y-intercept. But for now, let's write our final equation, which is what we were looking for. The equation for the true coordinates, or given the true coordinates. So substituting the slope, y equals 3/2 x, and substituting the v-value of 0. So our equation now becomes y equals 3/2 x plus 0. Notice, 0 is not critical as a value, right? So we can actually omit it. So our final equation, y equals 3/2 x. And finally, here's our answer, our final equation. Y equals 3/2 x. This is our linear equation. Our slope, 3/2. Our v-value or y-intercept is 0, so we omitted it for this particular case.